Related papers 15 to 20. Bronze, silver, gold, and diamond. Important things are frequently left unwritten. Who but a poet knows the near impossibility of capturing the evanescences of feeling and thought? Where is an enlightened soul who doesn't decree his inability to tell of light? But they try. They keep trying, even though some things seem beyond anyone's ability to express in words. It is as if the visionaries of the world gird up their loins and shout at the whirlwind, knowing only God knows what they are shouting about. I'm no better. Something happened recently, and I'd have the whole world know it if there were a way to tell of it. But there is a way. Subjectivism tells me that my world exists right here as my own consciousness of things. That being so, I sit right down and write myself a letter outlining this recent happening, an inner event from which everyone I am can take courage. The nebulousness of words be damned. I shall speak to myself and understand. Sounds of the Japanese national anthem filled the huge gymnasium, and the television camera focused on the victor. His face was wreathed in smiles, and his eyes were full of tears. A young man from Japan had won the individual gold medal event in gymnastics. An American had taken second place, and he stood there also, a silver medallion around his neck, a smile of pride on his flushed and happy face. The third man from China wore the bronze. The three men stood motionless, their faces lifted toward the rising flags of their countries, the strains of the Japanese anthem bathing the world in a tingle of appreciation for rewards so vigorously fought for and earned. Rachel and I had pulled for the Americans, of course, eager to have the United States win this honor for the first time. As the action proceeded, however, and we saw the unbelievable intensity the Orientals were bringing into the competition, our allegiances began to shift. I wanted China to do well. This was their strong event. But the Japanese had won nothing yet, and their young man was giving his all, beyond anything one could imagine. Very soon, Rachel and I were pulling for the determined men from the East. The competition was close. A few thousandths of a point separated the leaders. As it turned out, the man from Japan won the gold by the merest fraction of a point. Rachel and I yelled as if he were our son. We shouted and clapped when the Chinese man won the bronze. It was the perfect ending, turning out in a finale as beautiful as anyone could have planned. Japan, the United States, and China, in that order. The Japanese victor stood, choking back the tears, and so did we. I'm sure I listened to his national anthem as closely as he did. My heart went out to the Chinese victor as well, knowing what long years of preparation had gone into the bronze medal that rested on his chest. Then it happened. A strange, mystical thing, just for me, just for me. Somewhere along the line of listening to the soulful music and watching the smiling winners standing tall in front of their flags, I was thunderstruck by a confirming thought. Thunderstruck. That isn't too strong a word to use for such this occasion. Nor is it hyperbole of an old writer trying to dramatize an event. To be so jolted and awed at the same time by a sudden realization of something hidden deeply in the heart of me has happened rarely in these years of my life. It isn't likely I can fully explain the realization, but I'm damned well determined to try. A poor mention is better than none. But who will understand, really understand? One would have to have lived my life and experience my experiences and suffer the intensity of them and feel them clear through to the bloody bone in all the anguish of the many years of anguish, in the torment of those experiences before one could fully understand. There are a few old soldiers out there who will have a gut feeling about some of this. Men who had to fight their way through two miserable wars, one against the Japanese and another against the Chinese. They may have an inkling, if they came out of those wars, their insides battered and broken and trembling. But unless they lived in China for a part of their lives and had grown to love those beautiful people and fight with them as a soldier, fight to the death with them against the proud men of Japan, only to have turned around to a war against those same Chinese troops in the jagged mountains of Korea, then come home to an insensate world that didn't and still doesn't see the perpetual raw tendencies of spirit that stays with some men like an unending dream. Only then could they have an inkling of what I suddenly awakened to feel and realize deep in the heart of myself that night as I watched the Olympic ceremony. Neither the war against Japan nor China was easy for me. Warfare isn't easy for anyone, let alone an infantryman. But Korea was especially hard. For 5 years, China or Japan was my enemy to death. In actual linear fact, I tried to kill them. They tried to kill me. Dear God, I can't believe myself capable of such murderous intent now. Yet those 5 long years were the least of it. Nearly half a century later, the deep memory of me is still raw and tired to death of the lessons of those days. It wasn't until the Olympic ceremony was nearly over that I noticed the red rising sun on the Japanese flag and remembered that Japan had been my blood enemy once upon a time. I had watched the entire event without a single thought of those ancient animosities. And there was China, too, old friend and old enemy, and I had to bring it to mind, to recall we were once sworn to destroy one another. What can't be said here, or well understood, was, and still is, the sudden, grand, and nearly unbearable joy of relief and inner peace when I remembered, and then, having remembered, realized that my heart had forgiven, forgotten, and moved on. That is, when I remembered, this sounds so petty, and yet I still was glad to the core of me that the young man from Japan had won. When I remembered, I was still glad the Chinese athlete had won. When I remembered, I was still happy beyond belief to see the 3 nations standing together in friendship and pride of accomplishment, represented by those young men. They were the epitome of all I had fought for and hoped to accomplish those long years ago in the mountains of China and Korea. Nations now standing together in peace, and the United States still guaranteeing freedom to its citizens. You see, I had watched this event for the hours it had been on television, and the days before that without a single thought of yore, without one thought about the scarred soul and the weight of anguish so many old soldiers carry with them to their graves. Clearly, I had really ended the old hatreds and forgiven my old enemies. Forgiving them, I had forgiven myself and everyone. I had put down the weight of the old soldier's inner torment and moved on. That's what was awesome and thunderous to me. It was proven to me in the twinkling of an eye that I wasn't living the old prejudices. It was proven to me I had forgiven and been forgiven. More, I know that if I can do such a thing, anyone who wants to can do the same. Oh, who can know what this means to a person whose scars are invisible to others? Allowed to see that I had honestly and certainly forgiven myself, I looked down to see a medal on my chest. By God, it's diamond. How many men can be so privileged? Thank you, Father of Light. In afterthought, one wonders if life metes out such experiences just to let us know we're on course. Yes, yes. Surrender. From somewhere, we come to the place of willingness to surrender everything, even our concepts of God. Concepts are not good enough in the presence of Godhead. Willingness to disconnect ourselves from the comfort of the status quo and move on into the mainstream of Godhead has required, for me at least, the surrender, or the willingness to surrender, everything but the tangible form of life itself. And I am willing to let that go too, because it will go in time whether I am willing or not. Somehow, I was brought to stand before an interminable void, an empty and meaningless thing in my selfness. And in those days of wretchedness, not even longing for God anymore, but only for his peace, there came the child within to take my hand and make me into him. Blessed One who made me into his image and likeness. Such love he is, and we are that. Let me be very clear here. I do not believe everyone must be brought to such a state of helplessness before they can perceive the child within himself. They can hear or read honest words about the child by those who have rediscovered it for themselves, and put those words to the test for himself, to find them true or not true in the case of pretenders, without the anguish that was necessary for me. As it was for Abraham, a willingness to surrender everything is requisite. A journal entry about suffering. The letter from the little practitioner keeps coming to mind. She is convinced that a knowledge of truth keeps the rocks of adversity from one's pathway. She is absolutely unwilling to believe that truth often takes one to the very difficulty that teaches one most. Absurd, she says, as she writes in her letter. Spiritual growth certainly makes one's affairs easier to handle, no argument there. Spiritual growth keeps one out of many difficulties he might experience otherwise, no question there either. The study of truth helps keep our feet from straying, certainly. But there comes a day for every student of truth when he finds himself with one situation or another for which his vaunted knowledge doesn't help him as he thinks it should. This is a humbling time for the mighty metaphysician's role we play. Where is my truth now, we wonder then? Everyone who persists in learning the truth is brought to this humility correctly. The little lady will get there too, just as I did. Everyone who persists does and is troubled, exactly as Jesus said, even if it is the moment in time when one lets go the body of belief. The cicada struggles to emerge. The butterflies burst through the maze of his own thinking. Many students of truth wonder at this. Question: does one have to suffer in order to learn? Answer: no more than the discipline of the human experience demands, but one suffers additionally to whatever extent he insists that he is not, in truth, already the Son of God, or must suffer in order to become the Son of God. The child of us is already atop the mountain. That one takes this tangible form through time and space, confirming our dominion atop Deshan. Anguish puts us consciously back to the center of being atop Deshan. We never actually get away from the center and circumference where God put us, but I have been unmindful of that for much of my temporal experience, and that unmindfulness was the cause of my suffering. About suffering and death. Winter comes with a rush this year, from summer to winter without a fall at all. Freshly cut hickory and oak are all set to burn in Ben, the Franklin stove, tonight. The water pipes have been wrapped. Sam and Sally have their doses of antifreeze. If it gets really cold, I may try a little antifreeze myself. Dear Loretta, it is the human sense of things that moves in circles and seasons. It is the human sense of things that watches the cycles of human existence from birth to death, from joy one moment to suffering and anguish the next. And it is the human sense of things that insists on understanding the why of suffering, anguish, and death. Once a man came here from England and wanted to talk about my personal suffering, apparently to better understand his own. I refused, asking him why I should tell of my suffering rather than the light I had come to discover. Why not talk about the positive side of the coin rather than the negative? Why not tell of what is delineated rather than the delineator? He left unsatisfied and angry. Were he to ask me about suffering today, I would do my best to answer, albeit I'm not certain I could say much that makes sense to the human sense of things, or to our vaunted understanding. To this tangible human viewing, I have suffered as much as anyone, perhaps more. It is only the human viewing that believes enlightenment does away with tangible anguish and suffering. There is the common belief among metaphysicians that since the truth heals, the advent of enlightenment must surely bring an end to suffering, even an end to death. But in the human scene, the enlightened do not suffer less, but often more. Jesus cried in anguish, asking God why he had forsaken him. His disciples, with the exception of John, suffered all the way to their own executions. Paul carried his tormentor with him to his appearance of death. Mrs. Eddy suffered on and on. Aiken suffered on. Goldsmith suffered on. Watts, De Waters, Laird, none of their enlightenment prevented the appearances with intangibility of bodily decline and death. The human sense of me, the fiction, the belief, has had an awful, to human sense, tormentor most of my life. But does burning the sheet of music do anything to the principle of music? Does the torment we dream do anything to the dreamer on the bed except eventually awaken him? So we find reference to pain and suffering in Kay's journal again and again, but he, as I, speaks about a state of mind that is beyond feeling and thought, about meditation that is explosive in nature and sometimes accompanied by physical pain. For me, the viewing of suffering out there with others has been my external delineation of joy, here as I. The feeling of anguish and suffering here as myself is the delineator of joy supernal, accepted on faith alone, internally. Oh, this doesn't say it all. Loretta, do the flowers and grasses suffer when the first frost hits them? Do the insects that perish suffer when winter descends as it inevitably does? Do they really suffer death from the cold? Or is it like a circle, a cycle that renews itself with a spring that is also inevitable? Holistically speaking, the grasses, the flowers, the bugs come back when the cycle turns warm again, and death is only a resting in time and its seasons. Holistically speaking, there is no end to human or personal life, even though there appears to be a suffering decline unto death to our tangible viewing. But our tangible viewing is the action of awareness of life itself, which sees the seasons repeat themselves in an endless flow of seasons called eternity. How do I know this is so? Because I see the cycles repeat themselves and I see the seasons return. When I finally heard and felt and saw the symphony for which this physical body is the sheet music, I became the symphony, no longer limited as the printed page. But listen, listen. To hear and feel the symphony is only to accept it on faith alone. We merely accept the existence of the symphony for which all tangibility is the sheet music. That is all. It takes the sting from death and allows us to understand the why of tangibility's suffering. It says that suffering, here or there, is like the dark night that makes light plain. The light is real, the darkness only a seeming. Joy is real, the suffering only a seeming, albeit seeming very real. When we begin thinking holistically, solipsistically, or subjectively, we stop believing ourselves to be mere leaves on the tree and begin thinking in terms of tree. The leaf falls off the tree, so what? The tree lives. The body grows old and perishes, so what? Life goes right on untouched. Life is individual, alone, all in all. It only appears divided into billions of people and countless forms of life. In the same way, a single light appears divided into many colors when it flows through a prism. The real of Bill, Loretta, Rachel, and Paul is not suffering unto death. The real of us is life, God life, and is single, alone, only and all. Paul and Bill may seem to suffer and decline, but that seeming, seen holistically, is not real and has no power. The seeming is an is not, making the is of reality plain to awareness, just as the darkness makes the light plain. The light is real, darkness its means of being understood. Loretta, like you, I grow tired of words and their limitations. I am weary of trying to explain things that are purely heartfelt and have to do with simple faith beyond thoughts and feelings. This is why I publish so little now. The overtones have said it all already, as nearly as it can be said in words. Simple scene, ordinary little place, journal entry. A lady called. There was panic in her voice, and she was suffering mightily. I told her what I could. She quieted. Think back to one of your glimpses, I told her, and really think about it. Remember some of the events. In a bit, I went out to get a box of tea for Rachel. It was a cool winter evening, and I stopped at a little roadside restaurant to get a hamburger. I was thinking of the lady in anguish. As I sat there eating my double beef with lettuce, tomatoes, extra mayonnaise, and onions, I was suddenly, gently overcome with joy. I looked at the ordinary little place, and it had become extraordinary. The windows sparkled, the greenery was especially green, and the healthy plants hanging from giant baskets all but conversed with one another. The little people who waited on me were accommodating, clean and smiling, enthusiastic. I sat alone at a small table
bright
near
and
8 or
beautiful.
10 others in the dining room. Soft Christmas music filled the dining room, and I heard myself singing, "Santa Claus is coming to town," as I went for extra ketchup. The carpet was clean as a pin, the tables sparkled, a sweet-faced lady busied herself wiping them. The good taste of the designer was apparent in the subdued lighting and bright colors of the Tiffany lamps overhanging the tables. I have bumped my head on them more than once over the years. I sat there with my hamburger and felt extraordinarily happy. Just plain happy and full of gratitude that my affairs still let me look on a simple scene, seeing and being all the scene was intended to be, a happy place for strangers to get something good to eat. On the way out, I stopped and asked the clerks if I might speak to the manager. Their faces fell immediately. "Is there anything wrong? Was everything all right?" The little order taker asked, her smile gone. She asked again, "Was anything wrong?" "Oh, no," I smiled. Then I told the manager how nice things were looking and going, and his face broke into an enormous smile. "I needed to hear that," he said. "Yes," I said, "I know." Well, a lot of words. What comes to mind right now is that this afternoon was spent, in part, looking at an old paper on suffering, why suffering happens, and what it does for us. Most surely one of the grand things it does, in spades, is to let someone like me, when the anguish has stopped for a time, be able to see the extraordinary beauty of small, ordinary things. Yes, yes. Tonight I looked at that ordinary little place and saw absolute perfection at every wall, in every nook and cranny, and along the brass rails that gleamed like gold. The atmosphere was crisp with excitement. I felt wonderful for having been there to see it all. In the mind's eye, I had taken the panic lady with me, and she had seen the beauty of it all. I said to her, "All right, little lady, Find one of those glimpses in the mind's eye and consider it to be the treasure of God. That's what it is, nothing less. It will do its good work. It didn't appear in your affairs for nothing. Savor it, my friend, and let it bring an end to your fear. God's glimpses do wonders for us. I walked into Woodsong just as the phone rang. It was the lady. "The panic has gone," she said triumphantly. "Just as quickly as I brought a glimpse of light to mind, I felt bright and sparkling inside. I do not know how this works, but I know what one is to do and why." It's raining joy today. It's raining joy today, Father. Thank you for all the grass and trees and the little critters who so much enjoy the wetness. Oh, it is so wonderful today. A wet gray day, cool and comfortable, made for gentleness and thought, made for sitting still and being awareness itself. Today I look and see God's bounty from the sky, downward pouring, slanting gray lines, flowing into the earth's wet openings. I am still and thankful. So is my green selfhood. Fill me, Lord of life, fill me full.